sorry, Chair. It sounds like you're debating a little bit there.
No, I'm explaining. I'm explaining, Ms. Khalid.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay? I'm explaining exactly what's going on here.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. There was a surprise committee meeting held today, scheduled by Conservative Chair John Brassard, to hear a motion that would require committee to further deep dive into the Winnipeg lab scandal that resurfaced again last week. It didn't go the way the Conservatives had hoped, but we believe that it went as they expected.
Let's take a look.
Okay, I see Chong, Cooper, and Ellis, and Berthold, and Khalid. Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Bienvenue à la réunion numéro 107.
Welcome to meeting number 107 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics.
It's taking place in hybrid format. Pursuant to standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Pursuant to Standing Order 1064, the committee is meeting at the request of 4 members of the committee to discuss a request to undertake a study on the topic of documents in relation to the National Microbiology Laboratory in Winnipeg, tabled in the House on Wednesday, February 28th. Just want to remind all members that are here to make sure that the earpieces are not near the microphone, because it does cause potential feedback and potential injury to the interpreters. Just another reminder, too, is that all comments are to be directed through the chair. Now, when I dropped the gavel, I saw Mr. Chong, Mr. Cooper, Mr. Ellis, Mr. Berthold, and then Ms. Khalid came up. So I'm going to start.
I'm so very sorry, Chair. I thought that I had requested that I be second after, and I have given notice. I had my hand up.
God, she's starting already. Already.
Why does she want to be second? Why is that so important to her?
Gee, wonder why.
We'll find out.
I would really appreciate that, Chair.
Sorry, Ms. Khalid, but the meeting hadn't started. I didn't hear your comments because I was talking to the analyst.
Point of order.
Go ahead, Mr. Housefather, on your point of order.
Yeah, Ms. Khalid clearly spoke before anybody else had their hand up, Mr. Chair. You convened this meeting at a time without consulting anybody else on the committee. And to be honest, I thought that was exceptionally unfair of you. And
Mr. Housefather
clearly demonstrated her request to speak before any of the other people had their hands up.
The gavel had not dropped, Mr. Housefather.
But you were aware that she asked, Mr. Chair.
I was talking to the analyst at the time, Mr. Housefather, and I can assure you that this meeting has been convened in accordance with the standing orders and the rules of the House of Commons.
So we haven't even started the meeting, and the Liberals are already bellyaching that they're having a meeting about a fresh scandal. About, well, it's not even really fresh. It's been baking for about 3 years, since 2021, since the Conservatives and the Bloc and the NDP have actually been trying to get these documents in the first place. So, yeah, no such luck. And now they're annoyed that the Conservatives have called an emergency meeting during constituency week. Like, it's something else.
So I am going to start with Mr. Chong. I'm going to keep the list, and Ms. Khalid, you will go when you're recognized on the floor. Mr. Chong, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I am going to move a motion, and then I will speak to the motion. So I will begin by presenting my motion.
That in light of the February 28th, 2024 tabling of the Winnipeg lab documents, which contained the government's own findings, concluding that the People's Republic of China and its entities infiltrated Canada's top microbiology lab, a national security breach representing a very serious and credible threat to Canada. And given that access to this information had been denied to Parliament and all Canadians by the government for several years, the committee undertake a study pursuant to Standing Orders 108, 3, H, 6, and 7 of the collection and transmission of information and intelligence within the Government of Canada, and the government's reliance on its overclassification to deny access to it by Parliament and Canadians, provided that the committee report its findings to the House and call the following witnesses to appear.
Okay, so from what I'm understanding from this motion that Mr. Chong is presenting, he's saying in light of the fact that China was able to infiltrate one of Canada's top labs, and in light of the fact that they were able to get information out of there and pass it back to China, and in light of the fact that the government overclassified, that's what he said, overclassified the documents, meaning they rated them too restrictive, so it prohibited access to the rest of the House. In light of all of that, he is motioning that they undertake a series of committee meetings to investigate this further.
A, the Departmental Security Officer, Executive Director of Security, Public Health Agency of Canada, the Deputy Minister of Health, Dr. Stephen Lucas, the Vice President, Infectious Diseases Branch, Public Health Agency of Canada, Dr. Donald Shepard, the Vice President, National Microbiology Laboratory Branch, Public Health Agency of Canada, Dr. Guillaume Poliquin, the President of the Public Health Agency of Canada, Heather Jeffrey, the Minister of Health, the Honourable Mark Holland, the Director of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, David Vigneault, the Deputy Clerk of the Privy Council and National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister, Nathalie Drouin, and the Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs, the Honourable Dominic LeBlanc. Mr. Chair, I'd like to give a brief couple of minutes of remarks on this motion so that all members...
Thank you, Mr. Chong. Before you go ahead, the motion is in order, and my understanding is that the clerk has shared the motion in both official languages with all members of the committee. Go ahead with your comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple minutes of remarks so that all members will have a say on this motion and we can get it to a vote in the time that we have. We finally, Mr. Chair, have the documents. In our view, this is the start of this matter, not the end. We are continuing off where we left 3 years ago when the Canada-China Committee asked for the Winnipeg lab documents. And I believe that this committee has to conduct this work because the government has indicated, and Minister Holland specifically, that no one within PIAC is going to be held accountable and terminated for these lapses at the Winnipeg lab. So I believe Parliament has a job to hold the government accountable. This is a grave and serious matter that requires a parliamentary to investigate. Dr. Chu clandestinely collaborated with the government and the military of the People's Republic of China and was paid by that same government and military of the People's Republic of China without the government of Canada knowing. These Winnipeg lab breaches are part of a broader pattern by this government of neglecting Canada's national security. We not only have the Winnipeg lab breaches, we have a neglect of sensitive areas of research at Canadian universities in the theft of intellectual property and the threat to national security that CSIS has now highlighted for almost a decade. We have the neglect of the PRC's foreign interference threat activities directed at democratic institutions like Parliament and at our democratic processes like our general elections, which has forced the government to call a public inquiry, which is ongoing. And in all of this, it's the Prime Minister, the head of government, that is responsible. There is a document, a PCO document, titled Open and Accountable Government. It is one of the founding documents of this current government. In that document, it is clear that the Prime Minister alone is responsible for the machinery of government, that the Prime Minister alone is responsible for how information and intelligence flows within the different entities of the Government of Canada, flows from services like the Canadian Security Intelligence Service to various departments and agencies of the government. That same document also makes it clear that the Prime Minister has a unique responsibility for national security. And so when we combine those two things together, we have a responsibility as parliamentarians to get to the bottom of this, because ultimately the Prime Minister is accountable to Parliament.
It's interesting because Pierre and Michael Chong have actually brought up a document And it sounds like something that, would have been in place for a long time. But it isn't. It's only been around since 2015, and it's almost like a mission statement. And here it is. So this is something that I don't know if Trudeau wrote or he had one of his people write, but it seems to be, this thing where he's proclamating that he's going to be a different type of government. And what it says is open and accountable governments set out core principles regarding the roles and responsibilities of ministers in Canada's system of responsible parliamentary government. This includes the central tenet of ministerial responsibility, both individual and collective, as well as ministers' relations with the Prime Minister and Cabinet, their portfolios and Parliament. It outlines standards of conduct expected of ministers, as well as addressing a range of administrative, procedure, and institutional matters. It also provides guidance to ministerial exempt staff and useful information for public servants and Canadians on Canada's system of government. Finally, on the critical issue of ethical conduct, ministers are expected to be thoroughly familiar with the Conflict of Interest Act. Gee, if only any of them actually read this. So this is actually where they're quoting from, and it essentially says that the buck stops with the Prime Minister, and he is responsible at the end of the day of everything that happens within the government. So Pierre has quoted from this, and Michael Chong has quoted for this, because Justin Trudeau keeps saying, oh, well, I didn't know. Well, this is your own document, buddy. And in your own document, you are saying you're responsible for the entire machinery of government. So, he's even trying to get away from his own rules that he himself has written now. So I just find it very interesting that they're continuing to use Justin Trudeau's own words and own documents in his grandstanding when he originally won the election back in 2015 to actually indict him.
As is the ministry. And so the motion that is in front of us today is a substantive motion that is focused on examining two things that are within the mandate of the committee. First, the purpose of the motion in front of us is to examine the flow of information and intelligence within the Government of Canada, to examine why this information and intelligence did not catch the clandestine activities of Dr. Chu before September 2018, when it was discovered that Dr. Chu had improperly registered a patent produced from work as a government scientist in the People's Republic of China. To discover why Dr. Chu had not been discovered in the 2 previous years, in 2017 and 18, of having clandestinely met with entities within the People's Republic of China and clandestinely received payments from the government and the military of the People's Republic of China for that travel. Purpose of the motion in respect of examining the flow of intelligence within the Government of Canada is to also examine why it took 10 months for the government to secure the lab when it had been discovered that a patent had been improperly registered in the PRC and government policy violated. The patent violation was discovered in September of 2018, yet it took 10 months till July 5th of 2019 for the government to secure the lab. Despite the fact that in the early part of 2019, when Dr. Chu's computer was seized by government IT, and despite the fact that Dr. Chu in the early part of 2019 was denied approval for a trip to the PRC, she was still allowed to ship lethal Ebola and Henipah viruses on March 31st of 2019 from the Winnipeg National Microbiology Laboratory to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. We need to understand why information didn't flow more quickly to prevent that from happening.
So, in short, they found that Dr. Chu was really shady. They found that there was a patent filed over in the People's Republic of China based on something that was in that lab. And they seized the computer of Dr. Chu, and basically the only punishment was, well, we're going to deny you a trip back to China, but go ahead, you're still allowed to ship whatever virus samples that you want, no problem. and he's saying, why? Why was this allowed? Because it doesn't say why in the hundreds of pages that were actually released this week, or last week rather. So these questions need answers. And to Pierre's point, to Michael Chong's point, nobody has been fired. This wasn't a sophisticated and extremely skilled operation that was able to get all of this stuff despite Canada's best efforts. No, there was no best efforts here. There was severe lapses in process and protocols, and everybody admits that. So the question is why?
The second substantive examination that the motion proposes is to examine why the documents originally requested in 2021 were overclassified. Minister Holland has indicated in the House of Commons that the classification of the documents was PIAC's responsibility alone. And so we need to understand why officials at the Public Health Agency of Canada incorrectly classified these documents and denied a parliamentary committee this information. And that's why, Mr. Chair, all of the witnesses, with the exception of two witnesses, exception of three witnesses, I should say, are witnesses that are from PIAC. That is why we're asking for the Departmental Security Officer to appear. It was that position that originally flagged the violation of government policy in the registration of a patent in the People's Republic of China. It's why we're calling other officials from PIAC to understand what broke down in transmitting information that a parliamentary committee had ordered 4 times to Parliament and its committees. I'll finish, Mr. Chair, by saying this. I really, truly believe that we have a job to do as parliamentarians in this committee to hold the government accountable. The government defied 4 orders of the House of Commons and its committee for these documents. We called the president of the Public Health Agency in front of Canada to condemn him for this defiance of this order and for refusing to hand over the documents. The government subsequently took the Speaker of the House of Commons to court and subsequently called an early election, which had the effect of dissolving the 4 orders. And after 3 long years, we finally have gotten access to the documents, and we need to continue this examination in order to hold the government accountable. We cannot let this defiance of Parliament that took place 3 years ago go unanswered and unexamined, and we cannot allow these national security breaches to go to continue. And that's why it's so important, I think, this committee adopts this motion, examines this matter, and I hope produces a report with recommendations to improve the government's performance in these matters. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I wonder, is this an angle that the Conservatives are using to try to force an early election?
I sure hope so.
Because if Trudeau called an election over this the first time,
Maybe he'll do it again.
maybe he'll do it again.
Well, I mean, again, it would be in the Liberals and the NDP's best interest to have an election called before April 22nd. And we're running out of time. So I guess we'll see what happens.
So we're not going to go through every single speaker that has actually spoken here. But you have Michael Chong, who presented the motion. And you have Mr. Berthold, who's a Conservative MP from Quebec. He speaks. Michael Cooper speaks. And MP Mr. Ellis speaks. And then Ikra Khalid speaks. Let's see what happens.
The next on the list is Ms. Khalid, followed by Mr. Villemur. Ms. Khalid, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your indulgence and for the privilege of being able to speak in this committee on this very, very important issue. First and foremost, I just want to start by thanking, as many members would know, I served on the ad hoc committee for Winnipeg Labs. And I want to thank MP Renee Villemur, Heather McPherson, and John Williamson, all from different parties, the 4 of us, worked very tirelessly to go through these documents and to ensure that we were actually being able to be open and transparent. It was a great process. And this committee, this ad hoc committee, was something that this Liberal government put into place. And it was difficult to get it going because the Conservatives dragged their feet for so long.
So it was the Conservatives' fault that the Liberals refused to hand over documents.
And I bet it was the Conservatives' fault that the Liberals tried to sue Anthony Rota as well.
And it was probably the Conservatives' fault that they called an early election back then. Why not?
Wow.
Everything's the Conservatives' fault.
Wow, those bad Conservatives.
And when we got through this months and months of work that we did collectively, nonpartisan way, to really find out and to understand what happened here, I think that we came to a good conclusion. And I really want to congratulate my 3 other colleagues on that really, really good work. Now, this ad hoc committee, we had proposed this ad hoc committee of parliamentarians to balance that parliamentary accountability while protecting national security. And Chair and colleagues, as you may know, I've sat on National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. I know how important it is for us to balance that relationship of accountability while also protecting our national security. And as my 4 Conservative colleagues, none of whom are permanent members of this committee, if I may add, have all alluded to, that there was apparently some kind of cover-up. There was no cover-up.
She's awfully defensive, isn't she?
She's defensive. She's talking down to everybody.
Yeah, but she does that normally.
Well, yeah. Sorry, Khalid, you can say whatever you want, but when a parliamentary committee orders an agency to produce documents 4 times and the agency doesn't, and when the Speaker of the House is going to intervene to actually get the documents, and then the Liberal government actually sues their own Speaker of the House to prevent that from happening, I don't know what you would call it, Khalid. What would you call it, Fox?
Cover up for sure, but it's not really it's not a strong enough word. What can we say here?
Obstruction.
Deliberate malignant interference. How does that sound?
There you go. That's a nice technical term. So Khalid goes on and on and on and on and on. We're not going to put you through all of what she has to say.
You're welcome.
But we are going to let you hear what she said at the end.
We know, and I think that all members of this party, and I will again have to say that every single Conservative member who signed this 1064 letter has been substituted out by another member. They are not here in this room. So clearly, this is not the emergency that these permanent members signed off on. They're not here. Clearly, they don't care when we have all of these people substituted in for what is the mandate and the expectation of what the Ethics Committee is. The events that are in these documents, while they're incredibly important, and our government's taken action by creating this ad hoc committee, by releasing those documents publicly, does not constitute an emergency of what transpired 5 years ago.
And again, she can have her own opinion, but it doesn't make it true. And she's referencing, oh, well, you know, the 4 permanent members of the committee that are Conservative, they're not here today. Why is that? You know, they don't care. The reason they're not there, and this is why the Conservatives, and I think most parties do this, they designate every single person who is an MP. They are designated as an alternate member on every single committee.
Yeah, they can swap in and out. It doesn't matter. They don't have to even be designated an alternate. They all just are alternates for each other on committee. And oftentimes when it's a very important file like this, they'll send in their A-listers, like Michael Cooper, for example, to be like, okay, you you are going to be on this file. Whoever was normally in that seat, sorry, you don't quite have the skill set, you're out.
Well, but there's a specific reason in this case, because Michael Cooper, he is a permanent member of the Standing Committee for House Procedures, or PROC. And what has PROC been discussing for the last year? Foreign interference when it comes to China. Who else is on PROC that is there? Mr. Berthold. Why is Michael Chong there? Michael Chong is the Shadow Minister for Foreign Relations.
And he was directly affected by Chinese foreign interference.
100%. Okay? And why is Mr. Ellis there? He's the Shadow Minister for Health.
Well, Dr. Ellis, yeah.
Dr. Ellis.
He's a doctor, full stop.
So, he has a specific perspective as it relates to the Winnipeg lab.
Well, and he has a specific skill set. I mean, I imagine that when he was in medical school, he would have had to be a part of these laboratory procedures. And he would know what laboratory standards and procedures are so that he could scrutinize this report.
Right. So, at least the Conservatives have an actual doctor that is going to be the Minister of Health. So that's why these guys were brought in specifically. That's why they're here. There's no other reason, Khalid. That's why. Because contrary to the Liberals, the Conservatives actually say, okay, who is going to be best for a particular job in question? And then they look at their roster and they pick who the best people and most qualified people are going to be, and they put them forward. Why? Because they're the best people for the job.
There you go. Simple as that.
Many actions have been taken over these 5 years to ensure that these issues have been dealt with and that they won't happen again. That's literally the purpose of how we are going to get to ensuring that there's accountability and fairness in process. The ad hoc committee, which again I was a part of, we did important work over the course of many, many months to get to the bottom of this. This 1064 is not necessary. It's not urgent. It is not in the mandate of this ethics committee. And Chair, for that reason, I move that we adjourn this meeting.
Point of order.
Mr. Chair, I request a recorded vote on this.
Yes,
Thank you.
that's fine, Mr. Chong.
Point of order.
It's
Point
not,
of order, Mr. Chair.
On a point of order,
yeah.
it's not debatable what Ms. Khalid just...
I just want clarification to the effect of what Ms. Khalid has moved is to shut down debate.
I'm so sorry, Chair, but no, I refuse to let
That's debate, Mr.
this 1064 to become political gander for
Ms.
my
Khalid, I've already
Conservative
addressed
colleagues.
that with Mr. Cooper, and
Thank you.
and for those who are watching at home, this is a dilatory motion to stop the meeting before a decision is rendered. So I am going to ask the clerk. It is non-debatable. Mr. Chong has asked for recorded division, and I'm going to ask the clerk.
Sorry, Chair. It sounds like you're debating a little bit there.
No, I'm explaining. I'm explaining, Ms. Khalid.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, I'm explaining exactly what's going on here, and that there is no further debate. That you have asked that this meeting be adjourned without a decision of the committee being made. I'm explaining.
Because this is not the mandate of the committee, Chair.
That's your opinion. Go ahead.
Wow. I love the way Broussard just shot her down.
Yeah.
Right down.
Very calm, but very direct.
Very
right?
professional, too. He didn't say what I would have said.
No.
Just put it that way.
That's the thing. Khalid doesn't like other people saying things, but then, she just, jumps in and interrupts and, acts like a little brat. She doesn't conduct herself in a parliamentary fashion. I'm sorry, she doesn't.
No, she doesn't.
And, now, when it comes to Mr. Cooper, you saw the little smirk at the end. You can't call a point of order when somebody motions to adjourn the meeting.
Well, and I'm sure he knows that, but he's still got to try something, right?
Well, and I want to take everybody back to the beginning of the meeting, because this is very important. What we said in the introduction is that this didn't go the way the Conservatives had hoped, but it went the way they expected. So keep that in mind. We're going to finish this next little bit, and then I'm going to come back to that.
Well, I do want to say I really do appreciate the way that John Brassard had kind of given a nod to those of us watching at home. So I thought that was pretty cool. And I do appreciate that he explained it, because I think it's important for Canadians to know exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
Madam Clerk.
The vote is on the motion to adjourn the meeting. Mr. Baines.
Yes.
Ms. Damoff.
Yes.
Mr. Sorbar.
Yes, please.
Mr. Hausvater.
Yes.
Ms. Khalid.
Yes.
Mr. Cooper.
No?
Mr. Chong.
No.
Mr. Ellis.
No.
Monsieur Villemur.
Je suis contre.
Mr. Green.
Je veux pas la motion.
Yeas 6, nays 4.
So the motion to adjourn does carry by Ms. Khalid. This meeting is now adjourned.
Okay, so the bloc voted with the Conservatives. What's interesting is that Matthew Green, we praised him in the meeting with SNC-Lavalin.
And now we're going to disparage him.
Now we're back to the old Matthew Green.
Yeah.
You know, you had a little bit of a highlight, Mr. Green, but now you've gone and done this again. He does not represent a French riding whatsoever. He's way over in Hamilton Center. That's his riding, and he voiced his vote in French, which I found very interesting, and I think that's to kind of camouflage what his vote actually was.
Yeah, absolutely. Why else would you do it? Because again, I think it's more the Anglosphere that's watching this committee, because most of them are speaking in English. And yeah, there's the translation and stuff you can get on Pearlview. But I mean, just look at our channel, for example. Anyone who's watching this, since we're an English channel, is going to be watching it in English.
Yeah. So so for those wondering, Matthew Green voted with the Liberals, and Mr. Villemur, who's on the bloc, he voted with the Conservatives. Now, again, let's go back to the beginning of the meeting. Remember when Khalid and Housefather, they had interjected and said, "Oh no, Khalid, she put her hand up before anybody else," and yada 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 yada, and there was like all this drama about it. And then Brassard was like, "Oh, I didn't see you. All the Conservatives are speaking first." That was not an accident, folks.
Well, but according to Brassard, and we don't have footage of this because, again, it was before the committee started, she said, "Oh, I want to speak." So you have to wait till committee starts. Right.
And there's a reason that the gavel goes down, and then you indicate that you want to speak.
Your speaking order, yeah.
So, but the Liberals were like, "Well, you knew she wanted to." Well, he could have easily said, "Well, you're on Zoom." At lunchtime, the four Conservatives, they indicated that they wanted to speak too.
Well,
so
and that's the thing. What's to say you can't approach the chair, 3 hours before committee and say, "I want to speak first."
Yeah.
Like, that's why they bang the gavel.
So, but let's just cut through the BS on both sides. The Conservatives probably knew what was going to happen here. So because they knew what was going to happen, they made darn sure that they would have coordinated with Mr. Brassard when the gavel went down, that they were going to be able to speak. So all the Conservatives were able to speak, get it on record, and then the Liberals shut it down. And that's what they wanted. That's exactly what they wanted. And this gives the Conservatives a political, I would say a political hammer, so that they have one more thing to start throwing at the NDP and throw at the Liberals again. And they're going to be pushing this and pushing and pushing and pushing, because they want to know, why hasn't anybody been fired? Why hasn't anything really been done? And all you hear from the Liberals, "Oh, well, we've been trying to get these documents out. We really have, but the Conservatives have been dragging their feet." Right. Right. Yeah, nobody's buying that in the least. And then, for Khalid to say, oh, there's lots of stuff that's happened. Well, nobody knows what's happened because nobody knew what was actually in these documents in the first place. Well, we're just supposed to take it on your word, Khalid, that, oh, well, we saw these documents and everything was fine. Well, how did you see them? Why did you see them? National security, right? Oh, but, only you guys can see them. The most corrupt government that has ever been in the history of the history of Confederation, but you're the ones that we should be trusting to actually look at this stuff and decide what's national security and what isn't. But so that was committee. So they at least kept it going for about 45 minutes, folks. And this is not the last that you're going to hear about the Winnipeg Lab. You are going to hear about this over and over again. You're going to hear about STTC, which is the $1 billion slush fund, over and over again. And you're going to be hearing about ArriveCan over and over again, especially when Christian Firth shows up. So we will keep following this, folks, but it's just another example that there are too many skeletons in the closet when it comes to Justin Trudeau, and all of them are trying to burst out, and sooner or later, he's not going to be able to hold that door shut any longer.